This class on Psalm 114 is a continuation of the prior class that I gave on Psalm 113. This class too is being given in memory of Sarah Lam Dratch, Sarah Rivka, Bat Rav Nachum Nindel. It's also dedicated to the memory of my late father, Rav Simcha Bunim Ben Sinai V'Chana Gross, my late mother, Alta Mishkit Ella Bat Zev Esther, and my late father-in-law, Yigal Faraj Ben Mordechai and Adi Gohar Harunyan. In the prior class, I noticed that Psalms 113 through 118 comprised the Hallel, a series of praises of God that the Talmud instructed be recited on holidays marking God's salvation of Israel, like Passover. Psalm 113 offers the thematic introduction to the Hallel, which is God's transcendence of nature, yet his care for and involvement in human affairs. God shows his involvement in human affairs by reversing the fortunes of the destitute and the downtrodden, and then elevating them for all to see. The greatest example of this in Israelite history is, of course, the taking of Israel out of slavery in Egypt to become an independent people. This is the subject of Psalm 114, Israel's exodus from Egypt and entry into the Promised Land, always accompanied by God's miraculous intervention in nature. So there is a strong thematic link between Psalms 113 and 114, which is why I proposed giving both classes. There's another link between Psalm 113 and 114 as well, and that link is seen at the Passover Seder, when, according to the traditional Ashkenazic Haggadah, we recite Psalms 113 and 114, then break for the traditional Passover meal, and continue the recitation of the Hallel after the meal. This stems from a very old tradition brought down in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Psachim 116a, of both preparing and eating the Korban Pesach, or Paschal sacrifice, while reciting the Hallel. The way one recited the Hallel during the meal was not by stuffing one's mouth with food and trying to recite it that way, but instead by saying certain verses of the Hallel, breaking to eat the festive meal and Paschal sacrifice, then continuing to recite the remainder of the Hallel. The Mishnah and Talmud offer two competing views as to which verses were to be said before breaking for the meal. The school of Shammai maintained that the break should come after Psalm 113, and the school of Hillel maintained that the break should come after reciting both Psalms 113 and 114, which is in fact what we do today. The reasoning appears to be the following. Since Psalm 114 speaks of the exodus from Egypt, Shammai apparently thought that one should first experience, quote-unquote, the exodus by partaking of its symbols, matzah, moror, and the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, before praising God for the experience in Psalm 114. Another explanation might be to delay recounting Psalm 114, which focuses on the exodus, until after midnight, since the actual exodus itself began after midnight being the time when the plague of the firstborn struck. According to Hillel, however, a special Thanksgiving prayer, Asher Go'alanu, is traditionally recited before the meal, and this prayer cannot be offered without first noting its underlying reason, namely the exodus from Egypt described in Psalm 114. Thus, according to Hillel, which is our practice, we recite first Psalm 113 as an overture to the entire Hallel, then Psalm 114 as the necessary prelude to the Thanksgiving prayer, Asher Go'alanu, and only then eat the meal. The text of Psalm 114 is brief, only 8 verses. I'll therefore recite it first in Hebrew, then in English using the JPS translation, and try to offer a few thoughts about the psalm from both traditional and modern scholarly sources. So Psalm 114. B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me Amlo Ez. Hayta Yehuda lekatro Yisrael mam shalotav. Hayam ra'av ayonos, hayardein yisov le'achor. He'orim rakdu che'elim, givaot kivnei tzon. Malacha hayam kitanus, hayardein tisov le'achor. He'orim tirkadu che'elim, givaot kivnei tzon. Milifnei adon chuli oretz, milifnei Eloha Yaacov, ha'ufchi atzur agamayim, chalomish l'mayno mayim. Now the English. When Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech, Judah became his holy one, Israel his dominion. The sea saw them and fled, Jordan ran backward, mountains skipped like rams, hills like sheep. What alarmed you, O sea, that you fled, Jordan that you ran backward, mountains that you skipped like rams, hills like sheep? Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flinty rock into a fountain. The psalm essentially celebrates God's willingness to alter nature as well as history on behalf of the Israelites. It begins with a sense of motion and activity. B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, when the Israelites left Egypt, a dramatic opening unlike those typically seen in Psalms, which in a few words sweeps past momentous decades and events in Israelite history. The psalm presents the sea as having been split not once but twice, linking the splitting of the Reed Sea, when the Israelites left Egypt, with the splitting of the Jordan River to allow Joshua and the Israelites to enter the Promised Land. Mountains danced or fled like wild goats, possibly a reference to the experience at Sinai, where the Bible in Exodus 19:18 recounts that Mount Sinai itself trembled. The Psalter asks rhetorically, in wonderment, how can this be? But then this quickly dismisses the question, of course it can be, for God is the Lord of the world. The Psalter then combines the earlier motifs of mountains and sea to recount God's ultimate mastery of nature on behalf of the Israelites, turning rock, even the hardest flint, into springs of water, referencing the times in the Bible that Moses strikes a rock to produce water for the Israelites to drink. It's as if to say, if you thought that was impressive, well, how about this? A number of observations about the language of the Psalms. First, in a famous letter attributed to Dante and addressed to his patron, Can Grande, Dante suggests that his book, The Divine Comedy, should be read with multiple allegorical meanings, a technique that he claims is employed in the opening words of Psalm 114 when Israel came out of Egypt. To Dante, these words refer to different things: the historical deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, the Christian Messiah, the conversion of the soul from the wretchedness of sin to the state of grace, and the departure of the redeemed soul from this life to the liberty of eternal glory. And Dante, of course, suggests that his book is to be read the same way. The idea of fourfold interpretation is, of course, not originally Dante's. Jewish scholars have previously used the term pardes, which is the four-letter acronym Pei, Resh, Daled, Samach, for four levels of interpretation: Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod, corresponding roughly to Dante's literal, moral, analogical, and mystical categories. This idea of fourfold interpretation was later taken over into Christian commentary on Holy Scripture by the 3rd century scholar Origen of Alexandria, and through him became the standard approach of the Alexandrian tradition of biblical studies. Robert Alter and most modern Bible scholars tend, however, to dismiss Dante's suggestion that the opening of Psalm 114 is to be understood other than its plain literal meaning, a celebration of the Israelites' rescue from Egypt. The term Beit Yaacov me'am lo ez is translated by the JPS as the rescue of the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech. The term la'az, which is unique here in the Bible, is in fact frequently used in rabbinic texts to describe languages other than Hebrew. For example, the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Makot 16b discusses a Leuzi, who is a person who cannot speak or understand the language of the court. In Tractate Megillah 18a, the Talmud discusses the question of one who hears the Megillah read not in Hebrew but in Loazit, leading Rashi to comment there that any language that is not the Holy Tongue, meaning Hebrew, is called La'az. Indeed, Rashi himself, when translating certain difficult biblical words into Old French for his local audience, called it La'az. And some say that La'az is actually an acronym for Lashon Amzar, or the language of a foreign nation. But that in itself can't be the full implication of the term Am Lo Ez in our psalm, because the psalm seems to be suggesting that the house of Jacob was rescued from an Am Lo Ez, a pejorative characterization, and after all, it's hardly pejorative that foreign nations speak foreign tongues. Other scholars have therefore offered more complex meanings for the term Am Lo Ez. Robert Alter, for example, suggests that the term Am Lo Ez should be understood in the same way that the Greeks understood the term barbarian. A barbarian was a foreign person who spoke in an incomprehensible language, ba 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 ba, which became the onomatopoeic barbarian, but more importantly, he did not appreciate the benefits of Greek thought, culture, and civilization. So Alter translates Am Lo Ez as a barbarous tongued folk, and the suggestion of the psalm is that God rescued Israel from barbarians who did not appreciate Israelite ideas and culture. Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, in his book Baruch She'amar, suggests that Lo Ez is rooted in the term for slander, as in the Talmudic usage Lahotzi La'az, see for example in Tractate Psachim 51a. According to him, the psalmist may be suggesting that the Egyptians, out of embarrassment for their treatment or their ill treatment of the Israelites, developed all types of prejudicial stories about the Israelites to justify their enslavement and harsh treatment. Thus, the Psalter is suggesting that the Exodus allowed the Israelites to escape from an Amloes, a slanderous people. There are other references to this notion of a foreign tug nation that have a uniquely pejorative characterization. Thus, for example, in Deuteronomy 28:49, a horrifying section known as the Tochacha, in which Moses warns the Israelites of the calamities that will befall the Israelite nation if they do not heed God's words, he notes, "The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, a nation whose language you do not understand, Goy asher lo tishma et leshono." This reference to Amloes may therefore be the Psalter's effort to recall this dark imagery from Deuteronomy. Another possibility, in Isaiah 28:11, the prophet mocks those other prophets of Israel who were counseling the king and people not to be concerned with societal wrongs, and describe them as one who speaks to people in a stammering jargon and an alien tongue, using the term bela'agei safa. In biblical texts, certain languages like Gimel and Zayin are frequently interchanged, making la'ag and la'az essentially the same word. There are additional references to this in Isaiah 33:19 and Jeremiah 5:15. This leads Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, the 19th century leader of German Orthodox Jewry, to suggest that the psalm is suggesting that Egypt was a nation that ridiculed, as in la'ag, Israelite practices, and praising God for allowing Israel to emerge unscathed from this experience. Finally, there may have also been some long-standing pejorative notion of being ruled by a foreign-speaking or stammering people, a concept that we apparently can no longer appreciate. In verse 2, modern scholars suggest that the reference to both Judah and Israel refers to the Israelite nation after it had been divided into two kingdoms, the 10 northern tribes called Israel, and the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, collectively called Judah. To these scholars, the Psalter is suggesting that the temple in Jerusalem, which was in Judah, reflected God's dominion over both the northern and southern kingdoms. The term Judah cannot be a reference to the man Judah or to the Israelite nation as a whole, since the psalm characterizes it with a verb conjugated in the feminine. So Judah means the land of Judah or a portion of the land of Judah. Kodsho or Kodesh is a commonly used word for sanctuary. Thus, the reference in the psalm to the sanctuary in the land of Judah means the temple in Jerusalem, which continues to be the sanctuary for all of Israel, notwithstanding their political divisions. If this interpretation is correct, then this psalm's authorship is dated after 922 BCE, when the kingdom split, but before 722 BCE, when the kingdom of Israel was exiled and lost. It would also suggest that the author resided in Judah, possibly in Jerusalem itself. The reference to the sea, or Yam, seeing and fleeing, is at one level a clear reference to the Reed Sea splitting at the time of the Exodus. On the other hand, Yam was a primitive pagan deity from the creation myths of the Near East, others being Tanin, Tahom, Leviathan, and there are frequent references in the Bible to the monotheistic God crushing or casting these deities aside. There's a good discussion of the Bible's treatment of these deities in a book by Professor John Levinson of Harvard, Creation and the Persistence of Evil. Thus, the fleeing sea in this psalm may have been a clever double entendre, referring to both the Reed Sea as well as the primeval deity Yam, which was also well understood and better appreciated by the readers of its day than by modern readers. Finally, there is a considerable debate about the terminology in verse 7, Milifnei Adon Chuli Aretz, or tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord. Both the term chuli and the use of the term adon, or master, without describing master of what, are highly unusual. The reference to the Jordan being split to allow Joshua to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land brings to mind the references there in Joshua 3:11 and 13, where God is referred to as Adon Kol Haaretz, a phrase used elsewhere in Psalms 97:5 and in the Bible. Some scholars, like Hans Joachim Strauss, therefore suggest that the text as we have it has been corrupted, and should instead read Milifnei Adon Kol Haaretz Milifnei Aloha Yaacov, which actually would create a better parallelism than in the Masoretic text. Other scholars, like Robert Alter, agree that the parallelism would be better, but do not believe that that necessarily supports the proposed emendation. Either version, though, presents a powerful image of the presence of God.